Okay, let's see if this works. Hello everyone. Thanks for watching. So this is in this video I wanted to share my full AMCAS application. I saw a lot of these when I was applying and right before I started applying, and I thought they were probably the single most helpful resource out there that's available for free. Just seeing what real people did and what made them successful was incredibly helpful. So this is just me also doing the same. The goal here isn't to tell people what to do or how to do it. The goal is to just provide more real data. I think that's something that's hard to come by in the pre-med world. You can go on online forums and ask questions, but everything is going to be generalized. It's really hard to, or you could ask people what they did and they're going to give you like vague or ambiguous ideas like, oh, I volunteered or I did. It's like seeing real experiences plus how people actually wrote and discussed things in their application, again, was super helpful to me. So the goal is to just provide more data and add more information out there for people to see what worked. So I thought I'd start by sharing my cycle results. So I applied in the 23-24 cycle. So I'm still technically in it. I'm deciding where to go, and hopefully I'll start medical school this July or August. So I'm choosing between these places. I think it went really well. I'm really happy with what happened. It went better than I expected. So I'll just pause here, and you guys can see how it went. These diagrams are also available on Reddit. A lot of people will post theirs there. Generally, they'll have this information, but somewhere here they'll also have details about their application, so you can get a little bit more real data that way. Obviously, because I'm going to be sharing my entire application, I didn't bother putting anything here, but if I post this online, I will probably add some information about my application as well, so people who go on Reddit or something can maybe find it helpful. But yeah, let's move on. So I just redacted some stuff that was personal information that I didn't think was important. Here, the only thing I want to point out is that I applied really early. I think this was the first day or maybe the second day that the application actually opened. As you can see, I got processed really quickly, which helps. I have seen success stories of people who have applied much later in the cycle and have done really well. So it's definitely possible, but I just think applying early is a big advantage, and there's no reason not to if you can afford to. So definitely recommend that. I don't really have much to say here. As far as the self-identification with the Supreme Court stuff, I'm not sure if this is even visible to medical schools. I think there's some people decide to choose the decline to answer option. I personally just recommend always giving your identification, no matter what it is. I think it's a big part of who you are and your life experience, and I think everyone should be proud of that and should share that if it makes sense. I think it puts into context a lot of the other stuff you might be doing in your application. So I wouldn't encourage anyone to leave it out for whatever reason. Sorry. None of this seems really particularly interesting. I will say, if any of you have the chance to learn Spanish, highly recommend it. I wish I did. So yeah. Parents, both of my parents have higher education. I think that matters, especially for the SES disband. I think this is an automatic calculation, so it's based on, I think, either parent education level or like income or occupation. So nothing, no red flags here. Okay, on to coursework. So I'm not gonna go through each one here. It's pretty normal stuff. You can pause and see what class I took if you want to. The reason this is marked as a repeat is because this chem lab at my university is cross-listed with the Gen Chem Lab 1. And when I took that, because I was pre-med, because I had to, they considered it a repeat, even though this is an AP Chem lab I took in high school. I don't know why it's on here, but it is, and I had to report it. I don't want to talk about this. So this is spring 2020. So COVID, when everything switched online for us and we had to we got kicked out of our dorms and all that. I was already struggling heavily in computer science. I had no interest in CS, but I kept thinking the world is moving towards computers, so I should probably learn a little bit about it, and I sucked at it. I just did. So when things went online, it made it even worse, and I was not doing well. So I chose to withdraw, and later that gave me some anxiety because I heard withdrawals are a big deal and people care, but literally no one cared. No one cared at all. And you know, when I applied, it was never brought up even once. So yeah. I will say one of the other things I did was I actually, as a sophomore, I applied to the FlexMed program. It's an early assurance program at the Icon School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, and you apply there January of your sophomore year. So when I applied there, I only had grades up to this mark here and nothing else. So this withdrawal was really recent in their eyes. And I actually got an interview offer there when I applied as a sophomore. I haven't eventually ended up getting rejected, and I was able to ask them and get some feedback. And it was mainly because I had like no clinical experience at the time, which you'll see. But even this withdrawal was super recent in their eyes, and they still didn't think it was a big deal at all. So if you have like a withdrawal somewhere on your transcript and there's like a reasonable reason or a reasonable explanation for why, I wouldn't worry about it. So yeah, rest got to do pretty well in my courses. Got an A- in OChem 2 and in biochem, and I was a little stressed about that as well, but it's fine. No one cared. I love this class. This class was awesome. Yeah, so GPA here. Pleased to have done really well. So if you aren't familiar, AMCAS breaks it down into your biology, chemistry, physics, and math, or your science GPA, and then all other, and then your total. So I was a philosophy major, so all other was a little higher. Seemed to do well in those classes. Sorry, on to the MCAT. I took it once. This was my score. Lucky to have done well, and I have an MCAT video on this channel. If you haven't seen it before, I spent the exam fees plus about $300 total for study materials, and I've known people to spend as much as like 1,500, 2,000 on like prep courses. And so if you're trying to spend less money, I would recommend checking out what I did. I thought it was a really good approach, and the stuff I was able to use, it's not that expensive at all. I took preview, which is one of those situational judgment tests. I hate those tests. I think they're terrible. I've not met a single person who thinks they're a good test. And yes, I'm salty because I did poorly on this. But as you'll see, or as you saw with my cycle results, the schools that required it didn't seem to care. So I don't know what this is here for. I also took Casper, and I think I was third quartile on that. Casper, I think, is a mildly better exam than preview, because in Casper you can like write out answers and talk about stuff, which is helpful here. Preview is like a multiple choice, which multiple choice for situational judgment is so stupid. But anyway, yes, I'm salty about this, but no, it didn't seem to matter for me. So yeah. Okay. This is the good stuff. So you have up to 15 slots. If you don't know, I ended up using all 15. I don't think it's necessary to use all 15. The number I've heard is kind of like if you have less than 10, it's not the best thing ever. So maybe if you're looking at like if you only have 7 or 8 experiences to put in here, maybe you could consider waiting a year. But everyone's situation is different. So again, use your best judgment. And keep in mind, the categories you have for AMCAS include like publications, conferences you went to, hobbies, employment. Sorry. So like there's a lot that you can put on here. It's not just like direct pre-med stuff. And this is ordered most recent experience to oldest experience. So I applied in May of 2023. So this is most recent. So I started out by putting some of my, I call them academic research items, and it's because I have some publications that I'm on, so papers, some abstracts that I'm on, some non-peer-reviewed papers, and then I also did a thesis as part of my graduation. So there's a lot of different stuff, and I just called it academic research items because I wanted to highlight this paper, which is like a CME paper, this, which is like a proper peer-reviewed paper, and then this is my honors thesis. So I wanted to highlight 3 different things. And then I also did this, which I didn't see anyone else do this, but I thought this was the best way. So ResearchGate, if you don't know, it's like a really great website that for free like automatically compiles your all of your research productivity. It's kind of like Google Scholar, if you're familiar with that, but I think this picks up even more than Google Scholar. So like my thesis is on here. So you can make an account for free, and the URL, as you can see, is really easy. So anyone interested can just like copy paste this in, and it'll bring up everything. So if someone was really interested in seeing all the other stuff I had, they could copy this into their URL and or their browser, and it'll bring up my whole list of all my stuff. So if you have several research items and you don't have the space to fit them in, I use this approach. I think the citation I used here was AMA, and I just used a free citation maker to make this. I guess I don't think it matters. Like something I was worried about is in the second paper, my name doesn't even show up because I'm like towards the end of the authorship list, whereas for these two it does. So I've heard mixed things about whether that's good or not. If you're really worried, I guess you could just include all the authors up to the point where your name is. I just didn't have the character count to do that, but it doesn't seem to have mattered too much because I bet they trust that if you're putting this on here, you're fine, like you're on the paper. And then I've heard some people will look these up, so obviously if they do, they'll see your name there. So I have a bit of a cough. I'm home and I can't go anywhere, which is actually why I'm making this. So, okay. So first experience, substitute teacher. This is something I just do part-time just for some extra cash. I actually substitute at the same district that I was at for school, which is really cool. It's a fun experience to be on the other side of the desk. So this is the first example of the approach I took. There's a lot of different ways to go about this, but the approach I took was, if it's something obvious, I'm not going to spend time explaining what it is. Instead, I'm going to try to like tell a story or try to share a little bit more about why I was interested in doing it or what it means to me. Everyone knows what a substitute teacher does, so I didn't explain, oh, I help the teachers when, like, I think that's a waste of space because it's such an obvious thing. It was hard. I had only been doing this for a couple months when this came, so I didn't have like a lot of amazing experience. And even now, frankly, it's not like the most meaningful thing I've ever done. It's just a fun activity to do that also gets me some cash. So I tried to come up with a story, and the thing I wanted to show is that through this experience, I tried my best to connect with the kids and help them however I can. So I came up with this little story about how there was this kid I heard about who was getting bullied, and when I was a kid, like mostly everyone, we've all had some experience getting bullied. So I just talked about how I use that to connect with the kid, and really simple, nothing too crazy. But yeah, I would recommend if you have an activity on your thing that, and you'll see this later as well, if you have an activity that's really obvious, like grocery store cashier, like you don't need to explain what that is. Everyone knows. Just talk about something else. Okay. So this is a research experience. I'd only been doing this for a little while as well, but I continued it throughout my gap year. So these are projected hours, and you can see I did this here as well. So they like to see that you're continuing stuff during your application cycle. You're not just doing stuff up to the point you applied and then quitting and just sitting. So having these projected hours helps a lot. This is a research group I was part of, like I said, and as you can see, I grouped this research group that I was in and the conference I attended as part of it together in one. So conferences are a separate AMCAS category, and you can add all your conferences in as like a separate entry. But because I had 15 already, I didn't have space, so I just grouped it in with this one, and I made sure to include it in the title. And let's see, and I also like talked about it here. So I think that's a great way to save space if you're worried. Is just if you went to a conference for a particular research project, just include that with the research group. So yeah. As far as research goes, how I chose to write about it, I wanted to give a little bit of a background on what I did and what the project is about, and then after that, I want to talk about again what it means to me and what I'm taking away from it. So I didn't get too technical with things, just because I don't think like the vast majority of people who are going to read my application are not fungal researchers, so they're not going to care too much. I think what they're more going to care about is like, oh, why do you care? Like, what did you? And so I was like, oh, this showed me that human health actually is involved with a lot of other stuff, and I liked that, and I'm going to try to care about that more. So that's the approach I took. This is my first kind of non-clinical service experience. This is something that's been really important to me. I basically work with the courts here as a advocate in child welfare cases. So it's been really nice. It's been really meaningful. Um, so here, this one was interesting. I had to kind of explain what I do and what it's meant to me because this is a role that not everyone is probably super familiar with. So as you can see, the way I went about this is I framed that like what I do and what my responsibilities are in the context of like the kid I work with. So I do this, I do that, I do that. So that helps you learn a little bit more about what the role is and also like what my day to day is, what I'm actually doing, and how I'm doing it. So yeah, and again, as you can see, like the approach I took is at the end, I was like, okay, I just want to give more personality. I want to share more about myself. And so our favorite place to serve is a local farm that rescues abused livestock. And we made a video of us cleaning a cow pen too. That was actually really fun. But it's something completely silly, but I think it adds some personality. And I was asked about this a few times, so uh, I I would encourage people if they're interested to take a similar approach. Okay, more research. More research twice. Okay, so this is the lab I was in. This is how I wrote about. A lot of people join labs, so this is how I chose to write about it. Um, I wanted to highlight that I got a grant, so I started off with that. Um, just like in the other one, I wanted to highlight that I went to a conference for this. So again, I included all of the stuff associated with my research in the same experience as the research itself. Um, yeah, and again, the lesson here was that I started off in the lab here, and then I switched to a clinical research coordinator on a project between this lab and the urology department at our medical school. So my big takeaway was that I got to see how bench and clinical research come together. And yeah, again, I didn't get super technical here either. I had a little bit of explanation for kind of what the project is and what's going on and some basic results. So if someone was interested, they could be like, oh, this is what he did and this is what he found. But I didn't like explain the methods or anything in too much detail. So okay, here's another research. This one's cool. This is like a med ed kind of research. So I've tried to do different things in college. This was like lab. This was hardcore clinical, and this is med ed. So yeah, this one, because this research project was so weird, honestly, it's like not something many people have done. I took more time to explain what it is we were doing and why we were doing it, and then also some of our results. And then something I'll highlight here is my mentor for this project was adamant, and he like during the when we were preparing our presentations and our paper, um, he invited us to come to his division at the School of Medicine and present to the entire division several times so we would get more experience and get more feedback. And he was adamant that those count as oral presentations. So obviously they're not oral presentations at the level of going to a national conference or something and presenting on stage. But for him, they still counted as oral presentations because you're presenting to a group of experts who are there to listen to you. And so I included it, and I think it was good. So if any of you have like smaller scale presentations or experiences like that, I would encourage you to include them. Just because it's not like something at a national conference doesn't mean it doesn't matter. So I included it. We presented a poster at this conference, and this was my big takeaway. Sorry. I will say I got a first author paper, and like an oral presentation at the same conference in 2023. So ID Week 2023. These were both accepted in July of 23. So as you can see, a couple months after. And so I sent these as an update letter to all the schools I applied to, which I'm sure probably helped a little bit because a paper and an oral abstract on stage are nice things to have. So, okay, some more volunteering. This is something that I've done for quite a while, and as you see, it's been like several years now, and really like it. I tried to talk about what I did specifically. So if you guys are involved in anything and you took some initiative or you came up with something, definitely include it. So one of the things I did was I helped develop a little guide for the counselors to stay updated and continue their learning as part of my role. And yeah, I got adopted and eventually became part of the tools that the counselors use. So I wrote about it a little bit. I feel like my reflection here could have probably been a little better because this is super generic. So some feedback for me now that I'm looking back at this almost a year later is do better there. It's not bad, it's just very generic, and I think anyone could have said the same thing. So maybe being a little more specific would be good. Okay, so this is like my main clinical experience. So as you can see, I started January of 2021. I had submitted my application to FlexMed at Mount Sinai January 15th, 2021. So I had like zero clinical experience when I applied there. So it's understand. I'm surprised I got interviewed actually, but understandable that they rejected me. So just goes to show getting an interview with no clinical experience with a withdrawal, the thing I was talking about earlier, not a big deal. So cool. This is my first most meaningful experience. As you can see, there's like this pops up. If you're not familiar, you get 3 out of your 15 as most meaningful, and it opens up an extra, what is it, like 1,300 characters or something to explain why. So yeah, this was an amazing experience. I learned a lot. As you can see, this is how I chose to write about it. I love bringing in like characters whenever I can. Like it's just, I feel like it just makes the thing much more real. I don't like writing super like big soppy stories. I just like bringing people in and sharing what happened or what my experience with them was and how it helped. So as you can see here, for my most meaningful, I talk about someone who I cared about who had mental health issues, and that's why I wanted to work in this environment. And then I connected it back to another patient I worked with at the actual clinic and what her story was and what I learned from it. So one thing I'll say is I see this a lot, and it was hard for me too, is with stories involving patients or people you volunteer with, a lot of people make the story about the other person. This happens a lot in shadowing, for example, like people who will write a description for when they're shadowing, they'll be like, Dr. blah, blah, blah was so good and he took care of his patient so nicely, or Dr., blah, 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 she was amazing and she was such a good surgeon. And it's like, that's great, but then you're just talking about a different person. You're not talking about yourself at all. So I tried to strike a balance between sharing this patient's story and how interesting and how meaningful it was, but also like what role I played in her story to bring myself into it. So it's not just writing about another person, if that makes any sense. So yeah, great experience. Really loved it. This is something fun I got to do for a little while. Actually, a long while. Yeah, wow. This was fun. I was a science journalist for this think tank on our campus. And what I focused on is the intersection of science and other things. So one thing I spent quite a while on was climate change, and they knew that I was interested in going to medical school, so they gave me a project looking at climate change and medical issues or healthcare, and I got to publish an article in Forbes. So Forbes is obviously a magazine. It has a good name, but it's not a peer-reviewed publication. So I didn't include it up in my publication section. I just tried to squeeze it in here to try to highlight it because it is something I'm quite proud of, but I don't think it merits going into the scientific publications category or making it its own entry. So I tried to squeeze it in with this experience, and I highlighted it both in the title and then in the description. So yeah, and again, I tried to talk about why I cared about this. I tried to lean away from like what it taught me to why I care about this and what it meant to me whenever possible. There's always going to be important times where you have to talk about what something taught you, but I think a lot of those lessons that you learned are pretty explicit and obvious, if that makes sense. And so the idea of like showing and not telling, I think is a good idea. So focus more on what it meant to you and stuff. Obviously, if I said this experience taught me to write well, like no shit, of course it did. So I wouldn't waste space talking about obvious lessons like that. This is another thing I did. I was a pharmacy tech at first, so this is like the main clinical experience I had when I applied to that FlexMed program. Uh, Obviously, I chose to include it as medical clinical employment, ambiguous. Uh, Many people consider pharmacy to be not medical clinical because you're not actually helping with patient care, which is fair. I was fine putting this as medical clinical because it's still in a healthcare environment, and I had some other much more robust patient experience. So I think it was fine. If something like pharmacy tech or dental technician or like vaccinator or something is your main clinical experience, I would encourage you to try to get some more direct hands-on patient care experience, or maybe shadow a lot more to offset it, just because some people do think an experience like this is not quite clinical enough. So, oh yeah, for this, everyone knows what a pharmacy tech does. I highlighted the fact that I was our pharmacy's vaccine ambassador. So during flu seasons or periods where everyone's sick, it was my job to talk to people about flu shots and try to get them vaccinated. So I tried to highlight this other role I did within my pharmacy tech position, just because everyone knows what this is, but not a lot of people know that this also exists. I also talked about how I took some of the lessons I learned there and I used it to help create a club on my campus called Infected. So it's a club focused on education about infectious diseases, hence the name. I just didn't have room in my AMCAS to put the actual club. So this is a kind of sus way I included it in a different one. And then I made sure to clarify that all the hours listed are for pharmacy, not for the club. But I just didn't have any other room to talk about it. And I wanted to talk about how I did that. You're probably picking up on a little bit of a theme on my application so far. The theme is obviously that I like bugs and drugs. So, which is like infectious disease. So I did want to include this because it's something I cared about, but there's just no room. So that's the way I stuck it in. This is my main leadership experience. I was the CEO of this nonprofit journal. If you've never heard about it, it's a great organization. Look it up. You can join if you're in college. There's a lot of roles. Great experience, really great experience. One thing I wasn't sure about is there's a leadership category on AMCAS, and I first had this marked as leadership because it's obviously my most robust, most obvious leadership experience. But I wanted to highlight that all these hours, it's completely like everyone who works for this journal, it's completely volunteer, unpaid. And so I chose to categorize it as volunteering, not medical clinical, knowing that anyone who reads this would obviously know this is also a leadership experience. So I would get the leadership points without having to mark it as leadership. So that's something that you can consider if you have an activity that is a volunteer. So like if you work at a free clinic and you're like the shift lead, or by work I mean like if you serve at a free clinic, you can mark it as community service volunteer, and you can just write about your experience and also how like the leadership skills you got from it and what you do. And so people will know that it's leadership without you having to mark it as such. So yeah. Yeah, I don't have much to say about the writing. This is another one of my most meaningful experiences for obvious reasons. I learned a lot. Uh, and this is the way I chose to approach it. So yeah, I think there's so many ways you could have chosen to approach an experience like this, and many people will have an experience where they're leading something. So I just chose to talk about what I learned about leadership skills and why it was meaningful to me because of that. So yeah. This is another thing I did and currently do. As you can see, there's a lot of hours here. Science fair was a big deal to me when I was in middle and high school, and it was really awesome to be able to work for the same science fair I used to compete at on their organizational board. So really big experience, something I care about a lot. So obviously for this one, because it's an experience not many people would share or not many people would know about, I spent more time highlighting what I do and why I do it. So there's that. As for my most meaningful remarks, again, I wanted to talk. Not I focused on not what I learned or like how this is going to make me a better doctor, but just what it meant to me and what next steps are and what why I care. And I tried to share a story as well. This is one more research experience. So I was with this cancer group for quite a while, put a lot of hours into it. They were insane. They were awesome group to work with, but man, was it hard work. So a lot of data collection. So this is the kind of the lesson I have. Let's check to find the proper treatment. So the way I tried to shape it was that like this experience is one of the reasons why I want to go into academic medicine, because I saw how critical research is to advancing patient care and moving treatments along. So that was the angle I was trying to take. And again, I wanted to highlight the productivity I got from being a part of this group, and I kind of included it in the actual description. Okay, last two. So this is my shadowing. There's a lot of different approaches to shadowing, but the main two are either you have your shadowing as individual entries, and instead of listing it like this, you do like a description and you write about what you did and what you saw. I don't like that as much, just because the what you did part for a shadowing entry is going to be very minimal, because shadowing by definition is not doing much. You're mostly learning, and I think that's where people fall into the trap of writing about it, but they end up just writing a love letter to the physician, which is cool, but again, you learn nothing about the applicant from that. You just learn about what a great doctor they shadowed. So I think this is the one place in the application where making a list or like bullet points, I think, is not only acceptable but probably the right idea. Obviously, like when I talked about having 15 spots, and if you have like 9 or 10 right now, if you break your shadowing up into a couple of different experiences, it can help you get to a little higher number. So in that situation, maybe it makes sense to break them up as entries, but this is what I did, and I thought it was very efficient. And yeah, one thing I'll say is family medicine, primary care, this is something people really want you to see. So if you've just shadowed like surgery and ENT and sports medicine, I would really encourage you to try to shadow some kind of family medicine or primary care. That matters a lot. Another thing is I shadowed a couple PAs, and I learned a lot about healthcare that way. And I also learned about what they do and what their role is, and what I liked about it and what I didn't like about it. So I would encourage you to both shadow people in different healthcare roles and also include it. So some people told me not to. I did, and I would encourage you to, but obviously take that as you will. And then I included a hobby. Some people might ask, or actually, this is a question I asked too. I was like, again, I'm trying to like do all this stuff to like save space, blah 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 blah. Like, should I include a hobby, or should I use this 15th entry, 15th spot to do with something more productive? I decided to go for hobby. I've heard good things about hobbies, and how it helps open up a conversation in an interview and just share more about yourself. I wish I had a cooler hobby. Like I've seen some people put like, I don't know, like underwater or like scuba diving or like marine photography, or I don't know, just like really cool stuff. Um, I I just collect pins. I like it. I got asked about it a few times, and yeah, what I did is I used this entry to talk about other stuff I'm interested in. So like, I live in Utah, so we have lovely national parks. So I obviously go camping. I love the NBA, and I also like playing basketball, and I like going to museums. So I use this hobby to talk about some other hobbies. I thought I was being clever. Uh, but yeah, I would encourage you, if you have the space, include a hobby. It's fun. It helps. It helps even you out as a person. So, okay, personal statement. I'll pause, and you guys can, I guess, just freeze it and read. This thing was difficult to write. This thing, I took so many drafts. Sorry. So the approach I took was I tried a few experimental versions, and it just wasn't clicking. So eventually I settled on something this is probably the most like tried and true, straightforward, but also dry approach to the personal statement. You have an opening paragraph that talks about your first experience, or Dr. Gray, I think, calls this his seed. If you've seen any of his videos, so there's the seed there, kind of what got you interested. And then you talk about like the experiences you had, like the experiences you've had since then that have solidified it, confirmed it, taught you more, helped you cement that as what you want to do. and then you tie it all together. So it's kind of like if you guys ever took like AP or IB literature, English literature in high school, like the very classic like 5 to 6 paragraph essay, like introduction, body, conclusion. So I did basically the same thing. Um, Again, I think it made for a good personal statement in terms of the fact that it told them who I am. It told them why I want to become a physician. That's the biggest, biggest single most important thing that your personal statement has to do. It has to explain why you want to become a doctor, um, because that's literally the prompt. And all this stuff will show them that you're going to be a great medical student. You're going to be a great person to work with. This is what's filling in the gaps of why you want to do this, why you care. So that should be the big thing that you should answer with this personal statement. So I think it did a decent job of doing that. It told them why I got interested in the first place, and then the experience I've had that have solidified it for me, and kind of what I'm taking away from it. I do think, I've read some personal statements where people have been able to like drag a theme all the way through their personal statement and like continue it, which is really nice to read, but it's just really difficult. So I would say if you can take a similar approach and get at least one good version this way, then use your extra time to come up with something experimental if you want, if that's something that really you care about, if you were like a creative writing major or something. But I think having this is better than trying something super experimental and failing, because at the end of the day, this is not going to get any points for creativity or no one's frankly, no one, it's not memorable. Like no one's going to remember this. But for me personally, I was willing to have a personal statement that was at the end of my application that showed more about who I am, why I care, shared some of my reflections, and at least like tied my package together, rather than risking it and being remembered for something that failed miserably. So that's just the approach I took. Yeah, these are the experiences I chose to write about. And something I will say is like, because my whole application was about academic medicine and wanting to do that, I thought it was important to include like some kind of a research experience. So in this paragraph, I talk a little bit about the research I've done. Here, this is another call back to the club I started. I found another way to squeeze it in. And so the approach I took was I was going to try to highlight like an experience that showed me a different side of medicine. So this was like investigation and furthering our knowledge. This was like connecting with patients individually and the educational aspect of medicine. This was kind of the advocacy aspect of medicine and the cultural awareness that you need and the social awareness that you need, and how much I enjoyed working with someone who was really struggling, and how gratifying it was to give them space. And this was like just straight up patient care and caring for people and their families. So this is this is it. Cool. Letters of recommendation, extremely important. Every single one of my letters of recommendation people I had either taken 2 or more courses from, so they'd known me for at least a year because we're a semester system, so at least one full academic year, or had known me for multiple years because there were people I did work with for various extracurriculars. So I think that helped a lot. My school list, as you saw this above in the Sankey diagram. Okay, I wanted to close by sharing some stuff. So this is my reflections on my own application, looking back and now knowing a lot more. Pros, I think the timing was super important. It helped me a lot. I don't think I would have been one of the people who would have been super successful if I had applied late. So that's good. One of the things that I think helped my application a lot was that the fundamentals were solid. And so what I mean by the fundamentals is like there's going to be people out there who have incredible experiences, incredible life experiences, just have done really amazing stuff. And that's great. And it's understandable that medical schools are going to want to scoop those people up and highlight them because they're incredible people. If you don't have anything like that, like for me, pretty vanilla guy. I don't have any crazy life experiences. I've lived a very privileged life, so I have not overcome much adversity. And all of my experiences, I think, were well-rounded, but there was nothing like super wow about them. So I was a little worried because I was like, oh, I heard you need like X factors to get into medical school, like really unique stuff. Um, at the end of the day, there's just not enough seats, or there's more seats than there are like super unique people. So if you're a unique person watching this, definitely highlight that, use it to your advantage. You're going to be very successful, and that's amazing. If you're someone like me watching this who is kind of generic overall, um, don't worry too much, because again, there's more seats than there are like like fascinating people that you can write a book about. So what you should do is you should focus on making your fundamentals strong. So the fundamentals, I'll talk about this in the next slide. So I'll explain. So just hold on, but keep this idea of the fundamentals are solid um, in the back of your head. Letters of recommendation were strong, as I said, and I thought my writing was good. I wouldn't say it was the most excellent writing ever. I didn't spend as much time on it as I wanted, but I think it was good, or even good enough. Um, I think there was nothing super cringe. Hopefully, correct me if I'm wrong. Um, and I didn't like try to get super experimental. I think I shared what I did, talked about why I cared and what it meant to me, and I didn't do stuff like this taught me that, or I will be a good doctor because. I think those are things that people sometimes try to do that don't go well. Things that weren't so good. One thing is I, partly because of COVID and partly because I came into college, I just wanted to explore a lot, which is fair, which is good. As you can see, I have 4 research experiences that I put in my application, right? And all 4 vary. Like one of them is 700 hours, but the others are like between like 150 to 400. And they're all very different, like clinical, basic science, med ed, which is great. But one thing I wish I had done is like I started those research experiences pretty late, most of them at least, especially because of COVID. And I wish I had come into college, um, found a lab or a group, and kind of stuck with them the entire time. I've seen some people do that, and I think what happens when you do that is by year like 2 or 3 or even 4, like you've been around for so long, you've taken up more responsibility in the lab. Um, and what you're able to do at that point is you're able to like see a research project from start to finish. I think that's really important. I was able to do that once, but it was a med ed study, and those are just not as impactful. So I wish I had gotten the chance to like propose an idea for, sorry, like start it, come up with a methodology for, do all the data, do all the analysis for it, and conclude it, and then try to like wrap it up and either present it or publish it. Like that whole beginning to end, I really wish I had gotten to do at a level more so than I had currently gotten to do in the end. And I think that comes with finding a group that you want to work with and sticking with them for a long time instead of moving around. So I moved around a little bit more than I would have liked at this point. Another thing is I came in obviously being super interested in infectious disease, and I still am. Sorry, it's what I want to do. Obviously, might change my mind, but it's what I want to do. Um, so what I did, I spent the first 2 years on campus. Like I got involved with that clinical cancer group, which was amazing because it was my first experience with clinical research, and that's when I found out I really love clinical research. But I kept like going onto our like biology school's website to see if anyone was doing stuff related to like medical microbiology or just microbiology in general, because that was, in my opinion, the closest I could get to what I wanted to do. It wasn't until I was like at the end of junior year almost, I think, that I realized I could literally like look at the local school of medicine that has an infectious diseases division and reach out to people there. To me, the idea of like reaching out to actual doctors was so prohibitive that I kept sticking to our like main undergrad and graduate campuses for research. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with those, and medical schools love basic science. But for me, I think if I had gotten the confidence to just email actual doctors who are doing the work I want to do, and ask them if I could join any projects they have, I would have been able to find a project that I could see beginning to end much faster. So, so if you're interested in anything that's like more directly clinical, and there's like a medical school nearby or a department of medicine or anything, definitely do not hesitate, would be my advice. Reach out to the people doing the work and ask if you can join. Uh, the narrative thing, this is a big deal. People care about this a lot. as you can see, my narrative was like there's a few angles, but I care about academic medicine, I care about infectious diseases, and then I really like pediatrics because I've done a lot of work with kids. And I'll if I had to put money on what I end up in, it would probably be pediatric infectious disease as a subspecialty, but who knows? So those were kind of the themes in my application. Um, Something I wish is maybe I would have just fleshed that out more, or again found ways to bring it into my personal statement a little more, maybe, um, or just like invested more time in activities that really line up with it. This one's, if you, I think I did a good enough job, and I think there's something to be said for being well rounded, and not having all your eggs in one basket. So this is kind of a double edged sword, if you will. It can help, but obviously, if you're saying like if you want to become a neuroscientist or a neurologist, like, and all your activities are about neurology, um, I think that could raise some questions. It's like, oh, what if he gets to medical school and he doesn't like neurology? Does that mean he hates everything else too? So I think it's good to have some variety as well. So I'm glad my clinical experience was in psychiatry, um, and I've done other work too, just to show that I have some more experience outside of my comfort zone. Um, but I think if there was just some ways to make the narrative a little more prominent, could have made me a little more memorable, maybe. And then this last one is I did a lot of, so there's only 15 spots on AMCAS. When I was getting ready to apply, I listed out all my experiences, and I had 22 things that I had done, that I had invested like 50 or more hours in, and there were 18 things I had done that I had invested 100 or more hours in. So I was really torn on which ones to include in my AMCAS and which ones I would have to leave out. So obviously I chose the ones that I thought best reflected my narrative and best reflected these fundamentals that again I'll talk about soon. But going back, I wish I had not done so many things and instead focused on the stuff that actually, well, now I know it into my application. Back then I didn't, but focused on stuff that I really cared about and just given them more hours. So one of those things was like, let me find it. This science journalist activity, I could have probably doubled my hours here if I hadn't done like those 3 extra activities, and I could have like gotten even more involved in the idea of climate change. Climate change is something that I'm very interested in. A lot of the medical schools I'm looking at have like interest groups for climate change, and that's something I want to do. So like at the University of Utah where I went, we have this thing called the Wilkes Center for Climate Science. Maybe I could have gotten involved there. Maybe I could have done a research project there, or like maybe I could have become a writer for them. So I just wish this like climate change angle is something I would have invested more time in, because back when I was doing it, I was loving it, but I kept thinking like this isn't really applicable to medical school, so maybe I should move on and do other stuff. And I did. And looking back, that was a bad decision, because medical schools really care about. Actually, I literally write it here. Medical professionals unite by the goal of serving patients and improving health, but I have found that medicine doesn't require you to relinquish your other interests. Instead, a more holistic approach strengthens our understanding of human health. I literally wrote about it because I realized this as I was writing my application, is that the more stuff you're involved in or the more auxiliary interests you have, the more you bring to the class and the more you bring to the profession. So I wish I had not quit this so early and moved on to more like medical experiences. And actually the stuff I moved on to wasn't even like medical stuff. It was stuff that I thought would make me a better medical school applicant or make me a better medical student. So yeah, that's a bit of a regret. So if you're doing stuff in school or in your extracurriculars that you're really liking and you don't see them as like directly relevant to your medical school application, don't stop them. Keep doing them. They add a lot. I've met people who have done like investment banking stuff or fintech stuff or real estate stuff. Like all that stuff is great. It shows who you are as a person, shows what you're interested in, and it's all good skills. Like you still learn a lot. So yeah. Yay. Okay, these are some of my tips. Before I start, I want to say I am not on an admissions committee. I don't have any formal experience. Obviously, I'm a current applicant right now. Cross it out to symbolize that I don't. So these are just my tips, just what I've learned, what I've seen. Take it with a grain of salt, incorporate this into the feedback you've gotten from other people. Okay, so going back to the idea of the fundamentals, this is where it comes in. That's an A, I promise that's an A. Okay, so what are medical schools looking for? I think a lot of people think medical schools are looking for great doctors. And so like I've seen people do stuff like they'll have sewing or knitting for a hobby, and they'll write like, this is gonna make me a better surgeon because I'm gonna suture better. It's like, I mean, that's an exaggerated example. I have seen that though. It is an exaggerated example, but it's reflective of what people try to do. Sometimes they'll try to include activities or write about it in a way that shows that they know a lot about the medical field and they think they're going to be a great doctor. This especially comes into play when people are writing about like experiences working with people, like people focused experiences, like the empathy that I've accrued. It's such a ridiculous statement, but like, this is going to make me more empathetic doctor, and it's like, that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for people who are going to be great medical students. It's the medical school's job to make you into a doctor. They're looking for people who are going to come in and be great medical students. So if you guys haven't seen already, the AAMC has a list of, I think it's like up to 17 or something now. It's like competencies for entering medical students. You'll see nowhere on that list does it say like can take a great physical exam. Like it doesn't. It's focused on more general attributes that they think a medical student should have. And I think choosing activities and writing about them in a way that doesn't say that you have those attributes, because again, that's telling, not showing, but instead shows that you have those attributes. I think that's really important, and that's where the fundamentals come in. I think there used to be 15 competencies instead of 17, and there was this big thing going around on social media where everyone was like, oh, we get 15 slots and there's 15 competencies. Is that AAMC's code for telling us to like link one experience to a competency? And it's like, no. Like, I think one of the competencies is like oral communication, and another one is like cultural humility or cultural competence. So literally, like, it would be so hard to choose an experience that just highlights one, right? For example, yeah, this where I was a counselor for a community test site. I work with a lot of people who are considered marginalized or underserved in some way in the healthcare world, and working with those people shows that you're trying to develop cultural competency. And if I'm a counselor, if I'm a health and prevention counselor, I have oral communication skills, right? So this one activity this is like a 2-in-1. And there's many other competencies too, like a desire to learn, a desire to take initiative, just stuff like that. And like I made a QR code handbook, like that's like 4-in-1. So any of your activities will show multiple competencies. So what I did when I was applying was I listed every single competency on so I was like, here are the comps, and I was like, and then I listed my activities. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4. And I just went through and I was like, oh, activity 1 seems to check off these 2. Activity 2 seems to check off this one. Activity 4 seems to check off these 3. So what I did was I lined up all of my activities, like all the 22 I mentioned, and I went through and I like checked off which of the competencies they would realistically show. And all I did was I made sure that each of the 17 was reflected at least once. At least once. So greater than 1, greater than equal to 1, right? Yeah. And so that's how I helped choose which 15 to put in, because there were some activities that were like showing one or even none of the competencies really, and there were others that were showing multiple. So I prioritized the multiple. Obviously, I also prioritized ones that were fitting with my narrative, but it's just another way you can decide what to include. And then this list right here, this is like the big like fundamentals list. I think these, from what I've talked to doctors, current practitioners, research doctors, and I asked them like, what do you think like really matters in a medical student? And they said these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like these 7 are like the golden 7. I don't know. These are like really important to show. So teamwork, because this is what really, as a medical student, you really need this stuff. So all of these, this is kind of like research. Love patient care, obviously. Can teach others. This is a big one. A lot of medical schools are moving towards like team and case-based learning. So instead of lectures, or at least to supplement the lectures, like once or twice a week, you meet in small groups and I give you a case and You work together to solve the case, and that's how you learn. And so being able to work with each other and teach each other is a huge point that medical schools are focusing on. Obviously taking initiative, all these types of things. So what I think, going back to this point about the fundamentals, what I think is that I had activities and experiences and letters of recommendation that really highlighted, I guess highlighted is the wrong word. They didn't highlight. They demonstrated that these fundamental attributes exist within me. And I think that's what helped me be successful, is that I didn't have like a crazy story or anything. Like I didn't publish in Nature or like change the world with a nonprofit, but I had evidence that I would hopefully be a good medical student coming in because I've had experiences that highlight each of these. Um, Again, I'm going to talk about the teach others. A common experience a lot of people have is they're a TA, right, for a course. I didn't ever have that. And so I was stressing. There was another experience I had that was actually really important to me. I was an elected student senator on our campus of student government for a year. And that was like leadership work. I helped write and pass bills. I sat on meetings and committees, and that was a really important experience for me. But the competencies that it was showing were already shown by other activities I had, like the journal I was a part of, the community service work I've done. I was missing something for this teaching competency. So I took my student government out and I added substitute teacher in, because substitute teacher, even though it's nowhere near as like, I'm working with like, literally kids, right? But it was still the best thing I had personally for this teaching competency. So I chose to remove what is objectively a more impactful experience in the student government for a less impactful experience, but one that shows a different competency. So that's just a judgment call that you guys might have to make. And my advice is to, if you're stuck between two activities like that are both great, and even one might be like even better than the other. I think student government's objectively a more meaningful, more illustrative, more challenging experience than substitute teaching for kids, which is challenging in its own right. Don't get me wrong, I have stories, but you know what I mean. Something that might help tip the scales for one or the other is if they're hitting some of these competencies, and especially ones that are missing in your application right now, if that makes sense. So that's my biggest piece of advice. Space and resource allocation, obviously, again, you have 15 entries. So the way I did my research allocation was, again, combining experiences, especially with research, like include the research productivity or what you did with the research with the same research one. Just be consistent. That's all I'll say. So if you have enough space to where you want your conferences and your abstracts and your papers to be their separate entry, that's great. Just be consistent with it. Don't mix them in with the research one time and then leave them separate. That's what I would recommend. As far as your writing goes, don't do bullet points, please. You should put some effort into it. The only exception is obviously shadowing. I think that's where it makes sense to have them listed like that. But if you have like a hospital volunteer experience, don't be like stock shells. Like don't do that. Like write about it. Show some effort. I think it comes off better that way. Maybe don't, like, now's not the time to break out like Edgar Allan Poe style like fancy literature techniques, but you do you. That's who you are, and that's really important to you to show. Go for it. I would just recommend maybe not going so out of the box, just because the people who are reading, like the people who are going to be reading your application range from like 23-year-old medical students to 80-year-old practicing physicians or deans of the medical school who have been in the field for 60 years. And your writing and the way you present yourself has to appeal equally to both parties, and everyone in between. And I just think being a little, like, I tried to be a little more straightforward and to the point. I think that's just a safer approach, but high risk, high reward. If that's the approach you want to take, go for it. Grammarly, or I don't know if there's similar softwares, there probably are, is a lifesaver. Like there's no reason why someone should find, or there, I don't know how to say this, but there's no way someone should find any extra reasons to like dock points against you. Most people are very forgiving. In my secondary essays, for example, I made several typos. I made mistakes, and I got interviews to many places. If you have some little typos here and there, The vast majority of people are not going to care. They understand you're human and it happens. But you might come across some really mean person who's just looking for reasons to screen you out. And so don't give them those reasons. Make sure your grammar and your punctuation and stuff is as perfect as you can get it. This is a little ominous. Yeah. So another way you kind of stand out and set yourself apart and be memorable, because they're reviewing thousands of applications, is the themes and the narratives. Sorry, that I was talking about. When you're putting together your application, by like, the spring of the year you want to apply, because you want to apply in the summer or like late spring, early summer. By the spring is when you should probably be doing this activity right here, and also just like listing out all the stuff you've ever done, to see what your activities are, if you're missing anything, if everything looks good, and if you feel like you're ready to apply. At that point, when you list everything out, those themes and narratives should start to kind of appear on their own. You should start to see little things, right? Like for me, again, the idea of like, oh, this guy's obviously interested in academics. This guy obviously likes microbes, and he enjoys working with kids. Like these are not like super obvious, like scream in your face, but they're themes that appear in the application just based on the activities that I did. Those will appear on their own, and I think once you list things out and you see those themes, and hopefully they line up with what your interests are and what you care about, then you can start to embellish them more and highlight them more based on how you write about them, and the experiences and the stories you choose to highlight. If you list everything out and you have like either like 8 or 9 things only, or not 8, that's fine, like 5 or 6 things only, and they're all like super disjointed, that's not fatal or anything. That's not what I'm saying. But like it might be really hard to come up with a narrative or like present yourself as kind of like this nice, tightly packaged person with a specific interest. So it might be a little too late to try to weave something together from that cycle. So in that case, you could consider either getting involved in a few other things, or like reframing what you're doing, or you could consider like waiting a year. This is just what I think. And again, like I said, what you write about and how you present it can help bring out those themes further. So yeah, I mean, I think that's it. This is my AMCAS application. This is all of it. Had a good cycle. Really excited to decide where I go. If anyone has any insight on any of these schools, do let me know. One thing I will say is I'll drop my email in the description. I might be starting. So all these schools are damn expensive, and I might be starting some consulting and application help for people who are looking for it and could think that would be useful for them. So email me if you're interested. I looked at all the current services that are available, and like there's people out there who are charging like $200 something for a 30-minute like consult session, or like 400 for an hour. And then obviously there's like services that charge several thousand, up to like 10 plus thousand for application help. I'm pricing myself around like $50 to $100 depending on the service. So like 50 to $60, I think, for like a 1 hour office hour, and then like a personal statement review or like secondary essays review. I think it's gonna be around the same. And then I'm trying to do like a full application review for I think 99. Those prices might change, but it's going to be in that ballpark. And then I'm going to do 50% off if you have like a fee waiver or fee assistance program or something similar. So, and then so that might be available. I've also met a lot of people this application cycle, and I also have some friends who applied. So they might be joining, or they might be doing similar things. So I might refer you to other people if I think someone else can help you better. So there's that. So just reach out if that's something that's interesting to you, and I might make more information on that. We'll see. Just depends on my timing. I'm trying to really nail down those prices right now because I want to obviously make some money, but this process is already ridiculously expensive, so I don't want to add more to it. But yeah, I'll try to post this diagram on Reddit at some point. I'm just waiting on final scholarship offers, so I want to add that in before I post, because I think that's also helpful to see. And then I have some friends and I have some people I've met, so I'm going to try to encourage them all to post theirs as well, so there's more data. And I don't know if they're going to do it because it's not invasive, but it is pretty personal to post like a full application. I'm going to ask them to, or at least suggest they do if they want to. But at the very least, I'm going to try to get everyone I know to post these diagrams with their application info as well, not just the diagrams with the schools, because that's not helpful at all. But post these on Reddit. So in April, May, you should start to see this cycle's Sankey diagrams come up, and you can always see past years. And I think, again, those are really helpful. So yeah, well, thank you for watching, and be sure to leave a comment or something if you have any advice for future. I have some ideas for a few future videos I want to make. One might be like a guide to the pre-med process, kind of like my MCAT guide, but for pre-med stuff. And yeah, thanks so much.